Hello and welcome to the fifth and final episode of my beginner's guide to the Jeti logical switches. Today we're going to look at the various options that are available further along the menu beyond the things like the and or switches and multi-switches that we've already looked at. So if we go into there and go past these logical operators, past the multi, which is a bit debatable as logic, past exclusive or, we come to this. A up arrow, B down arrow, A is greater than B, A is less than B, and A is equal to B. Now, these to me aren't logical functions, they are just simply numerical comparators. However, Jeti has chosen to put them in the logical switches menu, so we'll just call them logical switches for the moment. I think the last three are very self-explanatory. A equals B, A less than B, A greater than B. And what it will do is simply look at, for instance, a stick position might be at plus 75% compared to B, control 2 might be at 50%, and in which case it would say, oh, well, A is greater than B, switch on, that kind of thing. This is the one that's of quite considerable interest. Condition A is up arrow, B is down arrow. What it means is that if A meets the condition, then the switch will turn on, but it will not turn off until B meets the condition. In other words, you haven't got a single point on A that switches it on and off. Once A has switched it on, it will remain switched on until B hits some trigger point to switch it off. Let's have a look at that first of all with a proportional control, and you'll see what we mean. So let's come up to Control 1, and I'll just use one stick for this. It could be two sticks, a stick and a switch, what have you, but we'll have a look just at this. So I'll use the throttle stick. There we go. Switch on point 100%, don't want that, I'll bring it back to about there. Press that, there's the switch on point at plus 70%. Okie doke. So if we have a look at that, as you can see, I move the throttle stick forward, it switches on, and even though the throttle stick is going on and off that switching point, the switch isn't switching off because B has not yet met its condition. So let's have a look at B, and we'll use the throttle stick again. So throttle stick for that. We'll have it switch off at this point here. So press that, get my switch off point. And notice we have to reverse it. The reason being that you don't want it switched on above that point. I want it to switch off as the throttle comes back close to idle. And so the logic switch is looking for a tick. So we reverse it, get a tick down there and a cross up there. Whereas switch A was a tick up above and a cross down below. Okie doke. So throttle sticks all the way back. Control 1, which was the throttle stick above 70%, is off. Control 2, which is the throttle stick below, what was it, about minus, I don't know, 30%, is on, so the condition is off. If I now move the throttle stick forward, it stays switched off until Control 1, part A, reaches its point and switches on. There it goes, and so the output is on. Now, I can bring the throttle back, as you can see, well below the trigger point. I'm coming way down below half throttle now, but I still haven't crossed the point that triggers that. And when I do, bingo, it switches it off. And it will not now switch on again until I get the throttle back above that point there. Pop. Okie doke. Now, in some ways, this is very similar to what you can do in sticks and switches setup. After all, remember in that, if you go in there, you'll find that for each stick, you can set a switch on and switch off point. And that will apply globally to anything that you assign to the P4 as a switch. This gives you yet another option in addition to that. And whereas the sticks and switches setup, that switch on and off point would apply only to that stick. With this, you can choose two different sticks, or a stick and a switch, or two switches. So if you were simply doing this on the one stick, I think you might just use the sticks and switches set up, unless you needed some switching point in there that was different to a switching point you needed to do, in which case you could come in here and set up a totally second switching point. Okie doke. Say OK to that one for the moment. Let's look at what happens if we use switches with it. So what I'm going to do is use these two switches here, and we'll say control 1 is that one. Okie doke. And control 2 is that one. Okie doke. Right. If I switch on A, the output goes on, and it will remain on even though I switch it off, because control 2, or B, as I should say, A and B, B has not gone on yet. And when I switch B on, there, the output goes off. No wiggling of B will switch it back on. You have to switch A on, and then you can do what you like with A. It won't switch off until B comes on. Okay, now that's very interesting. Two switches, separate switches. One switches it on and one switches it off. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, you're ahead of me. You may remember my video that I did particularly at a request from Nick, who wanted a way of having 4 flight modes on a 3-position switch. And if you remember, I'm sure you will, what he was after was that the transmitter would start in launch mode, but once you move to cruise mode after launch, it would lock out launch mode so that you could only ever come back to thermal mode. Yeah, so you start in launch mode, you've got launch, cruise, now it comes back to thermal. You can't get back to launch mode. And that was very easy using an OR switch looped on itself. And Nick was very happy because this did exactly what he'd asked for, and he lived happily ever after for a few hours until people on the British Association of Radio Control Solar Forum said to him, yeah, but what if you're in a competition and you've had to land very early in the slot and you want to relaunch and you're in a hurry because it's a competition? You're going to have to switch off the radio, switch it back on, you know, the 8-10 seconds it takes to power down, boot back up again. What you want is a reset switch. And one of his acquaintances, Gary, very quickly wrote out the instructions for him. Lovely. Put an AND logic switch into the loop. So you've now got an OR switch and an AND switch looping around on each other. And then if you're back in thermal mode, you could pull the reset switch and see it goes back to launch. So move to cruise. It's in thermal. You can't get back into launch mode, but put it in thermal mode, ping the switch, and you're in launch. Now, what have we just seen? 2 switches, one switching on and one switching off, but all within one logical switch rather than 2. Can we do it? You bet we can. Watch this. Go back to our logical switches. Have a look at logic switch C. See, there's logic switch 1 and 2, which set up the original condition that locks out the launch. Logic switch 2 provides the reset switch. Let's have a look at logic switch 3. Right, this time, control 1, which will switch the thing on, is the flight mode switch. So if I switch it to cruise mode, it comes on. Yep, and thus the switch comes on. But it will not go off until I pull switch G, the spring-loaded reset. Oh, now it's gone off. So there we go. We can do it all in one switch. Let's prove it. We'll go back to the flight modes. And there it is. Launch mode at the moment is on logic switch 1. Let's clear that out. Give it to logic switch 3. And we have to reverse it so that it's on. There we go. We're in launch mode. We've switched the radio on. It starts off in launch mode, but as soon as I switch it to cruise mode, launch mode is now locked out by that switch we've just made, and you can't get back into it. See, it goes to thermal, cruise, speed, thermal. You can't get back into launch. But if we put it back to launch at thermal mode, and I pull the spring-loaded switch, bingo, launch mode is reset. So the end effect is no different to what was originally proposed with an OR and an AND switch. It's just that we've done it now with one switch, and you wouldn't believe it if you saw the state of my workshop, but I like that sort of neatness. Well, I do in mathematics and programming anyway. So 2 different ways, exactly the same end, no problem, but one of them is much easier to create than trying to create 2 logic switches looped back round on each other. So there you have a lovely look at the A switches on, B switches off switch. And that concludes our lessons on the Jeti logical switches. You can get a lot more advanced, but I was trying to keep this straightforward for people who've never really done logic, struggled with it, didn't understand much what was going on, and I hope I've been able to at least give you the confidence to get in there and have some understanding of what you're doing and give it a try, because they can be very powerful. But remember, logic switches are when you want to compare 2 or more things and get a decision. If you've only got one thing, then just assign it straight as a switch. Don't bother yourself with the problems of logic switches. Have fun, everyone.